My name is Clara Holloway, and I am 32 years old. For most of my life, I believed that being the dependable one, the daughter who never faltered, was a badge of honor in my parents' eyes. Then, 3 weeks ago, a text message arrived that recalibrated my entire understanding of family and my place within it. Darling, it read, your father and I were thinking, it might be best if you sat this Thanksgiving out. Sophie and the kids need a quiet, simple holiday this year, and we want to give them our full attention. You understand. Love, Mom. Those few, carefully chosen words were not a sudden fracture, but the final, decisive snap in a foundation that had been cracking for years. I replied with 2 words, of course. They had no idea I'd just finalized the purchase of a restored farmhouse in Provence, or that I was about to orchestrate a Thanksgiving celebration that would quietly redraw the map of our family forever. Before I unfold the story of that week in France, let me paint a picture of the landscape I grew up in. I am the eldest daughter of Helen and Richard Holloway, and my relationship with them has always been a quiet paradox of love and expectation. I was the one who followed the path they laid out, the one who colored neatly inside the lines, top of my class, a full scholarship to Stanford, a stable and lucrative career in San Francisco's demanding tech world. Yet for all my achievements, the family spotlight seemed to have a homing beacon permanently fixed on my younger sister, Sophie. Sophie is 4 years my junior, a whirlwind of creative energy and charming vulnerability. She was the artist, the dreamer, the one who always seemed to be navigating some beautiful, chaotic crisis. While I worked 2 part-time jobs to cover my living expenses at university, my parents paid for Sophie's private art college tuition without a second thought. When I spent 2 years saving for a reliable used car, they surprised Sophie with a brand new convertible for her 21st birthday. The disparity was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of our family life, a rhythm so familiar I had taught myself to ignore it. Clara, you know your sister just feels things more deeply, my mother would say, her voice soft with practiced reason, whenever I dared to gently question the imbalance. You've always been so capable, so self-sufficient. That word, capable, became both my crown and my cage. It meant I was relied upon but rarely nurtured, trusted to manage my own struggles while Sophie's were treated as family emergencies. When I graduated summa cum laude, my parents attended the ceremony but left the reception early to help Sophie move into a new apartment after a dramatic breakup. When I was promoted to Director of User Experience at Aura Digital at 28, the dinner supposedly in my honor devolved into a tearful, 2-hour strategy session about Sophie's latest career pivot. Despite it all, I remained the steadfast daughter. I called every Sunday, flew home for every holiday, and provided a silent, sturdy safety net whenever it was needed. When Sophie's husband, Mark, was laid off from his graphic design job, I covered their rent for 4 months until he found new work. When my nephew, Ben, was struggling with reading, I was the one who spent weeks researching specialized tutors and educational programs. Always dependable, always present, always just slightly out of frame. Last year, however, my professional life took a turn that shifted the ground beneath my feet. After a decade of relentless work, I was made a partner at Aura Digital. The new role came with a compensation package that was, for the first time in my life, genuinely transformative. It gave me the freedom to realize a dream I'd harbored since a semester abroad in college, to own a piece of the French countryside. The Moss, a traditional Provençal farmhouse, was not an impulse buy. It was the culmination of years of quiet saving and obsessive research. When I saw the listing for a 200-year-old stone house nestled among olive groves near the village of Valambra, I knew it was mine. The sale closed in early October, and I became the silent, proud owner of a place I'd only ever seen in photographs. I hadn't told my family, saving the news as a grand surprise for Thanksgiving, a tangible symbol of a life I had built for myself. While my career blossomed, Sophie's life remained a charming, if precarious, dance. Mark was a kind and devoted father, but struggled to find stable employment in his field. They had 2 wonderful children, Ben and Lily, whom my parents adored with a fierce, all-consuming love. My own status as single and childless was another quiet mark against me, a puzzle my mother was always trying to solve. "You just haven't found the right person, sweetie," she'd say, her tone suggesting my fulfilling career and deep friendships were merely placeholders for the real life of marriage and motherhood. Beyond my immediate family, my deepest connections were with my cousins, Leo and Maya, my mother's sister's children. We had spent our childhood summers running wild at our grandparents' cabin on Lake Tahoe, forging a bond of easy camaraderie that had only strengthened with age. Leo was a family doctor in Portland, married with a young daughter, and Maya was a freelance journalist based in New York. We had a group chat that was a constant source of support and unfiltered humor, a space where I could share my triumphs and frustrations in a way I never could with my parents. My mother's sister, my Aunt Genevieve, was the family's quiet observer and my personal anchor. A professor of sociology at Berkeley, she was 60, unmarried by choice, and lived a life rich with intellectual curiosity, travel, and a network of devoted friends. She had always been my staunchest ally, the one person who saw the family dynamics with piercing clarity. "Your parents love you, Clara," she had told me over lunch one day. "But they don't always see you. They see their capable daughter, the one who doesn't need them. It isn't fair, but understanding their lens might help you protect your own heart." Thanksgiving had always been the apex of our family calendar. My mother would spend weeks planning an elaborate menu, a performance of domestic perfection. My father would orchestrate the seating charts and football-watching schedules with military precision. For one long weekend, their suburban home became the center of our universe. Last year's Thanksgiving had been a study in quiet humiliations. I'd brought my then-boyfriend, Daniel, hoping his presence would finally signal to my parents that I had a full and complete life. They seated us at a makeshift card table with the older children because, as my mother explained with a tight smile, we just ran out of room at the main table for Sophie's in-laws. When I tried to share the news of my major promotion during dinner, my mother nodded pleasantly before turning to Sophie and asking loudly about her recent success in a local pottery competition. Daniel and I broke up 2 months later. He gently cited my family's seeming inability to see me as a significant reason. Still, I had held out hope for this year. With a farmhouse in Provence, I had something real, something undeniable to share. This, I thought, would be the year they finally saw me. And then came the text message that dissolved that hope into air. The message arrived on a crisp Tuesday morning as I was prepping for a quarterly review. My phone buzzed with the custom tone I'd set for my mother. I smiled, assuming it was our usual pre-holiday check-in. The words on the screen felt like a physical blow. "Hi, darling. Your father and I were thinking, it might be best if you sat this Thanksgiving out. Sophie and the kids need a quiet, simple holiday this year, and we want to give them our full attention. You understand. Love, Mom." I read it once, twice, a third time. My hands felt cold. I set the phone down on my desk, the quarterly review completely forgotten. A wave of emotion, hot and sharp, washed over me, disbelief, then a deep, aching hurt, followed by a surge of white-hot anger. And then, something else, something unexpected, a strange, clarifying calm. This wasn't a new wound, it was merely the deepest cut from a familiar blade. I scrolled through years of text messages, the pattern now glaringly obvious. "Last Christmas, we're just doing gifts for the little ones this year, sweetie, so don't worry about bringing anything for us. My birthday in April, we might be a bit late for dinner, Sophie's having a crisis with her landlord." Casual conversations always, inevitably, swirled back to Sophie, her needs, her life. The memory of last year's Thanksgiving dinner returned with stinging clarity. I had arrived early, a case of expensive Pinot Noir in hand, carefully selected to pair with the turkey. My mother had thanked me politely and stored it in the cellar, later serving a cheap Merlot because Sophie's father-in-law prefers it. My father had spent the entire meal discussing Mark's job hunt and Ben's soccer team, asking me only a perfunctory, "So work is good," when there was a lull in the conversation. "Your promotion is wonderful, dear," my mother had said when I finally announced it myself. "But let's keep the focus on family tonight. Not everyone is so fortunate in their careers." It was a subtle shaming, a suggestion that my success was somehow unseemly in the face of my sister's struggles. My therapist, Dr. Sharma, had been gently guiding me toward this recognition for years. In our session just last week, she had posed a question that now reverberated in my mind. What would happen, Clara, if you gave your own needs the same weight your parents give to Sophie's? My first instinct was to lash out, to type a furious, wounded reply. After 32 years of perfect attendance, this is my reward? Or perhaps, I see. Am I still expected to contribute to Sophie's mortgage, or is it just my physical presence that's unwelcome? Or the simplest, most painful truth, I understand perfectly. I was never as important. I deleted them all. I closed my eyes and took a slow, deep breath, remembering another of Dr. Sharma's mantras: you cannot control their actions, only your own response. And that's when the idea began to coalesce, a faint glimmer that quickly brightened into a beacon. The farmhouse in Provence. My cousins, who had always treated me as an equal. Aunt Genevieve, who saw me so clearly. I had an alternative. Instead of begging for a seat at a table where my presence was considered a burden, I could set my own. Instead of performing for an audience that refused to applaud, I could gather one that already knew my worth. With a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years, I picked up my phone. My fingers were steady as I typed my reply. Of course. Those 2 words felt more powerful than 1,000 angry sentences. They offered no argument, no guilt, no drama. They were a simple, quiet acceptance of reality and the first step toward my own liberation. As I hit send, I felt a tectonic shift inside me. The dull, constant ache of seeking their approval began to recede, replaced by a thrilling, terrifying sense of possibility. My parents had no idea about the farmhouse. They had no idea that their casual, thoughtless exclusion was about to become the catalyst for the most beautiful Thanksgiving of my life. That evening, I sat on the small balcony of my San Francisco apartment, the lights of the Bay Bridge twinkling in the distance. A notebook lay open on my lap, a pen in my hand. The hurt was still there, a tender bruise in my chest, but for the first time, it was accompanied by a sense of profound freedom. For the first time, I would celebrate a holiday entirely on my own terms. Thanksgiving in Provence, I wrote at the top of the page. Then I began a list of names, people whose love felt like a gentle, warming light, not a flickering, conditional flame. As the list grew, so did my resolve. This wasn't just a backup plan. It was a reclamation. It was a boundary drawn not with anger, but with self-love. It was the birth of a new tradition, rising from the ashes of an old, painful one. By the time I went to bed, the city lights blurred by a happy film of tears, my heart felt lighter than it had in a decade. The message that had started my day as a rejection had, by its end, become an unexpected, liberating gift, the permission I had never been given to finally, unequivocally, choose myself. With just under 3 weeks to go, my plan required immediate and decisive action. The next morning, fueled by strong coffee and a new sense of purpose, I began making calls. My first was to Aunt Genevieve. "They did what?" she exclaimed, her voice a mix of indignation and weary resignation when I recounted my mother's text. "Oh, Clara. I am so sorry. That is just beyond the pale." "Actually," I said, and the truth of it surprised me, "I think it might be the best thing that's ever happened. Because I'm doing something different this year, and I hope you'll be a part of it." I told her everything about the partnership at work, the secret purchase, the 200-year-old stone farmhouse with its olive groves and lavender fields. "I'm hosting my own Thanksgiving. In Provence. And I want you to be the guest of honor." The line was silent for a beat, and then she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "My dear girl, I would move heaven and earth to be there." "And Clara? I am so incredibly proud of you right now." Her immediate, wholehearted acceptance was the wind in my sails. I called my cousins next. Leo and Maya reacted with predictable enthusiasm. "You bought a house in France and didn't tell us?" Maya shrieked with delight. "Thanksgiving in Provence instead of awkward silences and Aunt Helen's dry turkey? Book my flight. I'm there." "What about your parents?" Leo asked, his tone more cautious. "Do they know about any of this?" They've opted for a quiet, simple holiday, with just Sophie's family, I explained, quoting the text. This is my response. Clara, Leo said, his voice warm with understanding. This has been coming for a long time. Of course we'll be there. We wouldn't miss it for the world. The positive responses kept coming. My Uncle Robert and Aunt Susan, my father's brother and his wife, were thrilled. Their 2 daughters, my college-aged cousins, Chloe and Ava, reacted with squeals of excitement at the prospect of an international holiday. Even my mother's brother, Uncle Peter, and his husband, David, who traditionally spent Thanksgiving with David's family in Seattle, immediately rearranged their plans. With each yes, I felt a fractured piece of myself knitting back together. These people, my chosen family, valued me enough to drop everything, to book expensive, last-minute flights, to embrace this wild, sudden plan. Their excitement was a balm, soothing a wound I hadn't realized was so deep. The logistics were a welcome distraction, a complex puzzle that I dove into with focused energy. I hired a local property manager in Valambra to air out the house, arrange for extra linens, and stock the pantry. I booked a large van to shuttle everyone from the Marseille airport. I spent hours online, researching the best local markets and planning a menu that honored American traditions while celebrating the bounty of Provence. The most unexpected call came 3 days into my whirlwind of planning. It was Mark, Sophie's husband. Hey, Clara. Got a minute? He asked, his voice low. Of course, Mark. What's up? I replied, my guard instantly up. Look, this is a little weird, and Sophie doesn't know I'm calling. But I heard you weren't coming for Thanksgiving this year. That's right, I said, offering no further explanation. Something feels off about it, he continued, hesitating. Helen and Richard told us they suggested you might want some time to yourself, but the whole thing is strange. They've been really tense lately. I had always liked Mark. He was a kind man who often seemed adrift in the sea of my family's complex dynamics. I'd caught him shooting me sympathetic looks more than once during family gatherings. I'm doing something different this year, I said, making a split-second decision to trust him. I bought a house in France. I'm hosting Thanksgiving there. There was a stunned silence, followed by a burst of disbelieving laughter. You're kidding me. A house in France? Clara, that's incredible. Wait, are other people going? Most of the extended family, actually, I confirmed. Aunt Genevieve, Leo, and Maya, Uncle Robert's family. Another, longer silence. Okay, this makes a bit more sense now, he said finally. Helen and Richard had a huge fight with us last week. About money. They'd promised to help with Ben's tuition for his new school, and then they suddenly backed out, saying they needed to establish healthier financial boundaries. All of a sudden, they're experts on boundaries. He sighed. Listen, I know things are complicated between you and Sophie, but would there be any room at your table for us? The kids would be ecstatic to see France, and frankly, I don't think I can handle a quiet, simple Thanksgiving of simmering resentment with your parents. My gut reaction was a hard no. The entire point of this trip was to escape the very dynamic that Sophie's presence embodied. But as I listened to the genuine exhaustion in Mark's voice, I reconsidered. Dr. Sharma's words came back to me. You are in control of the environment now. This wasn't my parents' house, where they set the emotional temperature. This was my house. Excluding Sophie might feel satisfying in the short term, but it was a decision rooted in past hurt, not future healing. Maybe, just maybe, on neutral ground, away from our parents' influence, Sophie and I could find a different way of being sisters. Let me think about it, Mark, I said honestly. Physically, there's plenty of room. I just need to make sure I'm ready for it emotionally. That night, I had an emergency video call with Dr. Sharma. Am I setting myself up for disaster by inviting her? I asked. Won't it just import all the old baggage to this beautiful new space? Who is carrying the baggage, Clara? She asked gently. In the past, your parents held the family dynamic in place. They created the narrative of the needy sister and the capable one. What happens when they aren't there? Who gets to write the story then? The question shifted my perspective entirely. The next day, I called Mark back. You're all welcome, I said, my voice steady. But Mark, I need you to understand. This is my celebration in my home. Things have to be different. I get it, he said, his relief palpable. 100%. And Clara? Thank you. I have a feeling this could be really good for everyone. As the departure date neared, a sense of joyful anticipation replaced the last vestiges of my hurt. What had started as a reaction had become a creation. I was building something new, something founded on reciprocity and genuine affection. The day before I left for France, I received a final text from my mother. Just confirming dinner time for Thursday. What time should we expect Sophie and the family to arrive? Not a single question about my own plans. Not a hint of curiosity about why I hadn't called. It was the final, quiet confirmation that I had made the right choice. I'm not sure, I typed back. You'll have to ask them. Then I switched my phone to airplane mode, closed my suitcase, and left for the airport, ready to fly toward my new beginning. The 7-hour flight to Paris, followed by the connecting flight to Marseille, was a liminal space, a perfect buffer between my old reality and the new one I was stepping into. As the plane descended over the sun-drenched coastline of southern France, a profound sense of calm settled over me. I wasn't running away from my family, I was running toward myself. After collecting my rental van, I began the 90-minute drive north into the heart of Provence. The air, scented with pine and wild rosemary, felt like a welcome embrace. When I finally turned onto the gravel lane that led to my property, my breath caught in my throat. The online photos hadn't done it justice. The Moss was a long, 2-story stone building, its walls the color of warm honey, its shutters a faded, dusty blue. It sat on 5 acres of terraced land with ancient, gnarled olive trees on one side and a field of dormant lavender on the other. It was more beautiful, more real, than I had ever allowed myself to imagine. I spent that first day in a state of quiet awe, exploring every room. The interior was a perfect blend of rustic charm and modern comfort, thick stone walls, exposed chestnut beams, and a vast fireplace, but with a newly renovated kitchen and updated bathrooms. The main house had 4 bedrooms and a small, detached guest house, which I designated for Uncle Peter and David, offered another 2. The heart of the home was the kitchen, with its long, weathered farmhouse table that could easily seat 16. This, I thought, is where the new memories would be made. My nearest neighbors, an elderly couple named Monsieur and Madame Dubois, appeared that afternoon with a bottle of their homemade olive oil and a basket of local goat cheese. My university French was rusty, but we managed a warm, halting conversation. They were delighted by the idea of an American Thanksgiving in their quiet valley and gave me detailed instructions on which vendors to visit at the Saturday market in Villambre. On Thursday morning, I drove into the village. The market was a vibrant tapestry of sights and sounds. I bought armfuls of produce, earthy mushrooms, jewel-toned winter squash, fragrant herbs, and a bag of walnuts for the stuffing. The local butcher, a formidable man with a booming laugh, set aside a magnificent, free-range turkey for me, promising to have it ready for collection the following week. Back at the farmhouse, I fell into a rhythm of preparation. I experimented with a cranberry sauce substitute using local arelas, red bilberries, and planned to adapt my grandmother's cornbread stuffing recipe with Provençal herbs and chestnuts. The fusion of American tradition and French ingredients felt deeply symbolic of the new life I was building. The first guests arrived on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. Aunt Genevieve, Leo, and Maya had coordinated their flights and shared a rental car from Marseille. The sound of their tires crunching on the gravel sent a thrill of excitement through me. "Clara, it's a masterpiece," Aunt Genevieve said, holding me in a tight, long hug. "You've built yourself a sanctuary." Leo and Maya were like children let loose in a candy store, running through the house, exclaiming over every detail. "I cannot believe you kept this a secret," Maya said, linking her arm through mine. "It's the most beautiful place I've ever seen." Throughout the day, more family arrived in waves. Uncle Robert and Aunt Susan, with Chloe and Ava in tow, who immediately claimed the 2 attic rooms as their den. Uncle Peter and David arrived last, just before dusk, their car filled with carefully selected cases of wine from the Rhone Valley. That evening, we sat around the long kitchen table for a simple welcome dinner of beef bourguignon, crusty bread, and local cheese. The conversation was easy, overlapping, and filled with laughter. There were no emotional minefields to navigate, no unspoken hierarchies. There was just the simple, profound joy of being together. Sophie and her family were scheduled to arrive Wednesday afternoon. As the time of their arrival drew near, a knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach. I stood on the stone steps, watching the lane, my heart a nervous drum against my ribs. When their rental car finally appeared, I took a deep, steadying breath. Sophie got out of the car first, her expression hesitant, almost guarded. We hadn't spoken directly since the initial text exchange. For a long moment, we just looked at each other across the 20 feet of gravel that felt like a mile. The standoff was broken by Ben and Lily, who erupted from the back seat. "Aunt Clara," they shouted in unison, launching themselves at me. At 9 and 7, their affection was a pure, uncomplicated thing. I knelt to hug them, burying my face in their hair, the familiar scent of them grounding me. When I stood up, I met my sister's eyes. "Welcome to Provence," I said, my voice softer than I intended. Sophie's gaze swept over the house, the olive groves, the setting sun casting a golden light on the stone. "It's breathtaking, Clara," she said quietly. And then, with what looked like a monumental effort, she added, "Thank you for inviting us." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an acknowledgement of the years of imbalance. But it was a start. I gave her a small nod and turned to help Mark unload their bags. That evening, I gave them the grand tour. The house came alive with voices, with doors opening and closing, with the sound of my family settling in. Ben and Lily were thrilled to discover their cousins had saved them spots in the attic den, and the four of them were soon engrossed in a card game. We ended the tour back in the kitchen, where an impromptu spread of cheese, bread, and wine had appeared. Uncle Peter raised his glass. "To Clara," he said, his voice ringing with genuine warmth, "for having the vision to create this beautiful place and the generosity to share it with all of us. I think we may have just witnessed the birth of a new Holloway family tradition." As glasses clinked, I caught Sophie watching me from across the table. Her expression was complex, a mixture of admiration, confusion, and something else I couldn't name. When our eyes met, she offered a small, hesitant smile and lifted her glass in a silent toast. It was a tiny gesture, but in that moment, it felt like a bridge being built across a long and silent canyon. Later that night, as I lay in bed in my own room, in my own house, I realized I hadn't looked at my phone in hours. When I finally did, I saw a string of missed calls and texts from my mother, all asking for updates on Sophie's travel plans. Not one message asked where I was or how I was doing. The familiar sting of it was faint this time, a phantom pain. It was quickly overshadowed by the profound gratitude I felt for the family gathered under my roof. Setting the phone aside, I stepped onto my small stone terrace and looked out at the moonlit olive grove. Tomorrow was Thanksgiving. And for the first time in my life, I couldn't wait. Thanksgiving morning broke, cool and radiant. I woke before anyone else and crept downstairs. Standing in the quiet kitchen, watching the first rays of sun illuminate the silvery leaves of the olive trees, I felt a deep, settled peace. This place was mine. This day was mine. Slowly, the house stirred to life. Uncle David was the first to join me, offering to walk the kilometer into Valambra for fresh croissants. Aunt Genevieve appeared next, tying on an apron and wordlessly starting on a large fruit salad. A comfortable, domestic rhythm established itself, entirely different from the formal, tense preparations at my parents' home. After a long, lazy breakfast, we broke into informal teams. Maya, Leo, and I took on the main event in the kitchen. Uncle Robert and Mark volunteered for child containment duty, taking the four kids on an expedition to explore the property's old stone well. Aunt Susan and Sophie began the artistic endeavor of setting the long dining table, while Uncle Peter and David curated the wine selection and built a crackling fire in the great room. The kitchen became a joyous chaos of chopping, stirring, and laughing. "I don't think I've ever actually enjoyed the cooking part of Thanksgiving before," Maya said, mashing sweet potatoes with far too much butter. It's usually just a high-stress performance for Aunt Helen. Remember the year she remade my entire green bean casserole because I used canned fried onions instead of making them from scratch? Leo chimed in, and we all howled with laughter. Aunt Genevieve drifted in and out, a serene commander offering encouragement. "You're all doing beautifully," she told me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "This is what it's supposed to feel like. A collaboration, not a coronation." My phone, I noticed, remained silent. No frantic texts from my parents. It seemed they were content in their bubble, assuming I was somewhere in San Francisco alone. The thought no longer hurt, it simply was. Around noon, Mark returned with the kids, their cheeks rosy from the chill, their arms full of wildflowers they'd picked for the table. Ben and Lily proudly demonstrated the French phrases the village baker had taught them. As I praised their accents, I saw Sophie watching us from the doorway of the dining room. There was a softness in her expression I'd never seen before. It occurred to me that this was perhaps the first time she was seeing me with her children without our parents' filtering presence, without the subtle narrative of my childless life versus her full one. The afternoon flew by. The dining table became a work of art with linen runners, beeswax candles, and the children's handmade place cards, each decorated with a quirky drawing. By 3 o'clock, as the aroma of roasting turkey filled the house, a series of phones began to chime around the living room. "Clara," Aunt Susan called out. "You should probably see this." I wiped my floury hands on my apron and joined the small group huddled around Uncle Robert's phone. It was a group text from my mother to all her siblings and their spouses. "Hi everyone. Has anyone heard from Sophie? She and Mark aren't answering their phones, and we're starting to get worried. They were supposed to be here an hour ago." "She still has no idea," Maya whispered, looking at me. "Are we going to tell them?" I thought for a moment. A younger, more wounded version of myself would have relished the drama, would have wanted them to find out from a triumphant social media post. But that felt like playing their game. "Let's wait," I said, my voice firm. "Let's have our dinner. Today is about us. We'll deal with that later." A murmur of agreement went through the room. As we all dispersed back to our tasks, Sophie fell into step beside me. "I should have told them we were coming here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't know how. I knew they'd be hurt, and I didn't want to deal with it." "You don't owe them an explanation for choosing to be with your family," I said, and the word family now included her here in this house. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "When did you get so brave, Clara?" The question surprised me. "I don't know if it's bravery," I replied honestly. "I think it's just survival." "Well," she said, a sad smile touching her lips, "I admire it. And I'm sorry. For a lot." Before the moment could deepen, Lily burst into the kitchen demanding a quality control taste of the stuffing. But something had been said. A seed of a new understanding had been planted. As dusk fell, we all went to change, re-emerging in festive, comfortable attire. The house glowed. Just before we sat down, I stepped onto the terrace alone. The sky over the Luberon Mountains was streaked with violet and rose. I breathed in the cool, fragrant air, my heart full to bursting. This was not the Thanksgiving I had ever known, but it was the one I had, it seemed, always been waiting for. The dining room at the Moss was aglow. The long table, laden with food, shimmered in the candlelight. Through the French doors, the last blush of sunset painted the sky. Every seat was filled. As I stood at the head of the table, a wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. These people had crossed an ocean, altered their lives for a few days, all to answer my call. I raised my wine glass, my hand trembling slightly. I don't have the words to say how much this means to me," I began, my voice thick. "Thank you all for being here. For helping me turn a moment of hurt into something so incredibly beautiful. To this place. To this family. To new beginnings." A chorus of "to new beginnings" echoed through the room. Aunt Genevieve stood next. "And to Clara," she said, her eyes shining, "who has reminded all of us that the truest definition of home is not a place, but a feeling of being seen, loved, and accepted for exactly who you are. We are so proud of the woman you've become." Tears pricked my eyes as I sat down. To be seen. It was the one thing I had craved, the one thing I had never received from my parents. The dinner was the most joyful meal of my life. The food was past family style, the conversation was a boisterous, overlapping symphony of stories and laughter. Leo regaled us with a hilarious story about a patient, Maya described a recent interview with a reclusive author, and my cousins Chloe and Ava debated the merits of their college professors. There was no single, controlling narrative, just a rich tapestry of individual lives, all interwoven for this one perfect evening. When the platter of sliced turkey reached Sophie, she served her children and then, catching my eye, said loudly and clearly, "Clara, this is, without a doubt, the best Thanksgiving turkey I have ever eaten." Mom would be so jealous. A beat of silence fell over the table, and then it erupted in warm, knowing laughter. It was a release. The floodgates opened, and soon everyone was sharing stories of past Thanksgivings, my mother's kitchen tyranny, my father's obsession with the football schedule, the year Uncle Robert's political rant cleared half the room. It wasn't malicious, it was a collective, gentle exorcism of shared frustrations. After we'd cleared the main course and brought out the desserts, my pumpkin pie and a classic French tart tatin, Uncle Peter proposed we go around the table and share what we were thankful for. The answers were heartfelt and humorous. When it was Mark's turn, he looked at me. "I'm thankful for Clara," he said, his voice sincere. "For her strength and for her incredible generosity in welcoming us into this. She's shown us that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is burn down an old tradition to let a new one grow." Next to him, Sophie added quietly, "I'm thankful for a fresh start." Later, as coffee was served, Chloe suggested a group photo. We all crowded together in front of the massive stone fireplace, arms slung around each other, faces flushed with wine and happiness. Ava snapped a few pictures on her phone. "I'm posting this immediately," she declared. "The FOMO back home is going to be epic." The casual remark was a sudden reminder of the world outside our warm, glowing bubble. As if on cue, Sophie's phone, sitting on the sideboard, began to ring. The screen lit up with a picture of our mother. Sophie looked at me, a question in her eyes. I gave a slight nod. It was time. She answered, putting the call on speakerphone for the small group still gathered in the dining room. "Hi, Mom." "Sophie. Thank God. Where are you?" "We've been worried sick. Your father is pacing a hole in the carpet." "We're fine, Mom. We're just finishing Thanksgiving dinner." "What do you mean? You're having dinner with us." "Where are you?" Sophie took a deep breath, her eyes locked on mine. "We're in France, Mom. We're at Clara's house." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It stretched for a full 10 seconds. When my mother finally spoke, her voice was a thin, high wire of disbelief. "I don't understand. Clara is in San Francisco." "No, Mom, I'm not," I said, stepping closer to the phone. "I'm here. In Provence. In my house. With everyone." "Everyone," she repeated, the word sounding hollow. "Everyone except you and Dad," I confirmed gently. "Aunt Genevieve is here, Uncle Robert and his family, Uncle Peter and David, Leo, Maya. We're all here." Another long, stunned silence. I could practically hear the gears in her mind grinding, trying to process a reality that was so far outside her understanding. But we told you we wanted a quiet Thanksgiving," she finally stammered, a note of accusation creeping into her voice. "Yes, you did," I said, my voice even and calm. "And that's exactly what we're all having. The quietest, most peaceful Thanksgiving I can remember." The line went dead. She had hung up. Within a minute, a cacophony of rings and buzzes filled the room as my parents began calling everyone, one by one, their frantic calls going mostly to voicemail. We made a collective, unspoken decision not to let it derail our evening. The party continued, the mood slightly more subdued, but no less warm. An hour later, Ava showed me her Instagram post. The photo in front of the fireplace was beautiful, a perfect portrait of joy. The caption read, "Best Thanksgiving ever. #Provence, #family, #new traditions." The comments were already flooding in from friends and distant relatives. One, from a close family friend of my parents, read, Wow. Looks amazing. Helen and Richard must be having so much fun. The public facade was beginning to crumble. Are you okay? Aunt Genevieve asked, finding me on the terrace a while later. I am, I said, surprised by the truth of it. I thought I would feel triumphant or even guilty. But mostly I just feel calm. She smiled, wrapping her shawl tighter. That's how you know you did the right thing, my dear. Vengeance brings a fleeting satisfaction. Authenticity brings a lasting peace. As the evening wound down, my own phone rang. It was my father. I took a deep breath and stepped back out into the cool night air. Clara. Where is everyone? He demanded, his voice rough with anger and confusion. Your mother is hysterical. I told you, Dad. We're in France. At my house? Your house? Since when do you have a house in France? Since last month. It's a shame you and Mom have been too busy to ask me a single question about my life, or you might have known. The words were sharper than I intended, but they were true. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of that truth. Why would you do this, Clara? He finally asked, the anger giving way to genuine bewilderment. Why would you orchestrate this rebellion? You told me to stay away, I reminded him. You asked for space. I gave you what you asked for. I just filled that space with people who actually wanted to be with me. We didn't mean for you to abduct the entire family. What did you expect, Dad? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Did you expect me to sit alone in my apartment, feeling sorry for myself, while you celebrated with the daughter you preferred? Forgive me for having a little more self-respect than that. His sigh was a ragged sound, the first crack in his decades-long armor of certainty. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, I said softly. And it has been for my entire life. Look, I have to get back to my guests. We can talk about this another time. I ended the call before he could reply. As I walked back into the warm, glowing house, I felt a fundamental shift. I had spoken my truth, not with the fire of rage, but with the quiet, unshakable weight of conviction. And for the very first time, I had a feeling he might have actually heard me. The day after Thanksgiving was quiet and contemplative. A soft mist clung to the valley, muffling the world in a gentle gray blanket. I found Aunt Genevieve in the kitchen before anyone else, a pot of coffee already brewing. A restless night, she asked, handing me a mug. A full one, I corrected. My parents have been calling and texting since 5 a.m. I finally just turned my phone off. She nodded. You'll have to face them eventually. I know, I sighed. I just don't know what's left to say. The confrontation came later that morning. As I sat in the small study overlooking the lavender fields, Sophie appeared in the doorway. They won't stop calling my phone now, she said. Maybe we should just do this together. I nodded and took a deep breath as she dialed and put the phone on speaker. My mother answered instantly. Sophie. Finally. We have been worried sick. We're fine, Mom, Sophie said. Clara is here with me. Clara, my mother said, her voice tight. We need to talk about what you did. Your father and I feel completely betrayed. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? The old, conditioned guilt pricked at me, the instinct to apologize and smooth things over. But something had irrevocably changed. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to be uninvited from Thanksgiving? I countered, my voice low and steady. That's not what we meant, and you know it. Then what did you mean, Mom? When you told me to sit this one out. When you said you needed to give Sophie your full attention. What was I supposed to think? It's been stressful for her. We wanted to make things easy. And what about me? The question hung in the air, simple and vast. When has anyone in this family worried about making things easy for me? The silence was my answer. Years of unspoken resentment poured out of me, not in a torrent of anger, but in a steady, sorrowful stream. I spoke of the promotions ignored, the achievements downplayed, the constant, draining expectation that I would be the strong one, the one who never needed anything. When I finished, the line was utterly still. Finally, my father's voice came on, brusque and defensive. This is ridiculous, Clara. We have always supported you. Have you? I asked. When was the last time you asked me about a project I was passionate about? When was the last time you celebrated one of my successes without immediately pivoting to one of Sophie's problems? Before he could muster a defense, Sophie spoke, her voice clear and firm. "She's right, Dad." "What?" "She's right," Sophie repeated. "About how you treat us. It's different. I've always known it, but I never said anything." Because she hesitated, then took a plunge, because it was easier for me that way. And that wasn't fair to her. "I'm sorry, Clara." I reached across the desk and squeezed her hand, my eyes welling with tears. Her public validation was a gift I never knew I needed. The phone line was silent again. The two pillars of our family had been shaken, their fundamental truths challenged by both their daughters at once. I don't know what to do with this," my mother finally whispered, her voice small and lost. "What do you want from us, Clara?" my father asked, his usual bluster gone, replaced by something that sounded like genuine confusion. "I want you to see me," I said simply. "Not as the capable daughter, or the backup plan, or Sophie's less needy sister. Just as me, Clara. I want you to be curious about my life. That's all." Another long pause. Then my mother's voice, fragile but steady. "We can try, Clara. I don't know if we know how, but we can try." It wasn't everything. It wasn't a perfect resolution. But it was a start. "That's all I'm asking," I said. "And if you're willing to try, then you're welcome to join us next year. Here." The rest of the weekend passed in a warm, healing blur of shared meals, countryside walks, and easy companionship. The goodbyes on Sunday were emotional, filled with tight hugs and promises to make this an annual event. Sophie's hug was the longest. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." In the months that followed, things began to change, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. My weekly calls with my parents became more balanced. They asked questions about my work, my friends, my travels. They listened. It was awkward at times, like they were learning a new language, but they were trying. As the next November approached, they accepted my invitation to Provence. When they arrived at the Moss, my mother walked through the door, looked around at the bustling, happy scene I had created, and then looked directly at me. Her eyes were filled with a complex mix of regret and a new, unfamiliar pride. "You've built something truly beautiful here, Clara," she said. "We're so proud of you." Standing there, in my own home, surrounded by a family that had been broken and was now slowly, carefully, mending itself, I felt a sense of peace that was deeper and more profound than any achievement or acquisition. I had learned that sometimes the most loving act is not to accommodate, but to hold up a mirror. That the most powerful response to being excluded is not to bang on the door, but to build your own house. And that the family you are born into is only the beginning of the story. The real work lies in having the courage to create the family you need.